So this first activity, this whiteboard, which you can hopefully all now see, just like to ask you, if you were in the last session and you have had a chance to do that little bit of homework, what is it that you have been able to notice in school? For some schools, it might be that you are composting instead of sending food waste to landfill. For other schools, it might be to do with uniform. Is there anything that you think you're doing that's stopping things? And maybe even for those of you who weren't in the first session, is there anything you're doing at school that you know for a fact is stopping some waste going to landfill, which is a kind of this essentially the end um, purpose of thinking about circular economies is kind of reducing what goes into landfill. Excellent. Oh, I can see some sticky notes popping up. Wow, donated food waste gets recycled into aviation fuel. Whose is that?
Mine.
Is that you at Muirfield, Jane?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you tell us a tiny bit more about that?
Well, I asked the caretaker what happened with the food waste, and he said it was a local firm in the northwest, and they come and pick it up, and then it gets taken, it all gets washed, and the oil is then.
Sounds brilliant. Maybe we might add these to our next newsletter as suggestions for other schools and send them some links to things like FUS and perhaps the aviation fuel idea. So, just a little bit more about your school. I am going to launch a quick poll, just two questions. So, question one, have you got an eco committee or eco council? Question two, is your school an eco school? And I'm going to share the results. I'm just curious that in relation to those particular things, and I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms for this, just really briefly. I'm just curious to find out more about who is or was involved in these things. Obviously, if it's an eco committee, you've got students on the committee, but who is it who's pushing this agenda in your school? Are you here because senior leadership have asked you to, or is this work happening because of one or two really passionate students or passionate teachers or even passionate community members? But also, who is not involved, but you think they really, really should be? You should get an invitation now to join a breakout room. And this is just a quick conversation in your break. If you could pop into the chat who it is that's not involved, but you really think should be. This is something we will probably work into the next session, thinking about how to engage whole school communities and whole school approaches, parents, trustees, suppliers. Great, that's a really interesting thought, Helen, that thing of extending it outside in terms of your purchasing power. Okay, Ruth would like to get the cook on board. Yeah. Absolutely though, you know, there are so many players in a team, in a school team, aren't there? So fabulous. I'm going to move on. And actually, the next couple of minutes is going to be a bit of input, really. Thinking again about what does this mean, this kind of idea of the circular economy. Joining in. Okay, quick recap. Again, lots of you were here last time. Equally, there's a few of you who weren't. And there are a significant number who aren't actually here with us today. So this will be shared with them afterwards. Why this kind of push for circular economy? What is it that is the problem with landfill and with the traditional routes of getting rid of our waste? You saw this last time, but actually it's not just that particular part of the land that's affected. We've got the runoff into water supplies and water pollution. We've got then potential human health impacts. We've got air pollution from that landfill site, but equally the potential impact of that on the sort of localized climate. And we've also got soil pollution and then ending up with kind of areas of land that are not usable. And actually, we'll come back to that a little bit later in relation, particularly to the Liverpool City region. What happens to our rubbish? Now, but there are two of you in the room who are not from Liverpool City region. Mark joined us whilst we were in breakout rooms. Mark, you're very welcome. Mark's over in Sheffield, actually. But so this is really specific to Liverpool City region, but equally everyone's area, there will be a waste authority who's managing waste. So as a country, as a nation, as four nations of the UK, we produce 230 million tonnes of waste a year, most of which is sent abroad actually for processing. And in 23-24, now this isn't Liverpool City Region, but Liverpool City Council actually had the lowest recycling rates of any local authority in the Northwest. Actually, over and above that, we had the second lowest in the country, only beaten by, I think, Tower Hamlets in London. And actually not so far away from us, on the fringes of the city region, Stockport over in Manchester, had the highest rates at 60%. There's a real divergence there. And actually, even between our local authority areas here in Liverpool City Region, there are some significant differences in how recycling is dealt with, particularly. 33% of our landfill in the city region is food waste. And actually thinking back to what Jane was saying about using food waste for the creation of aviation fuel, I also know schools who have special composters that can deal with all kinds of food waste. Compost comes out of the other end, including cooked waste. These systems cost about £1,000, but not every school has access to them. But so 33% of our landfill is food waste, and if we're thinking about circular economy, there's enormous potential in what else can be done with that. 18.7% of landfill waste apparently could have been recycled. And again, this is kind of a little bit of input, just we're not all experts on these kinds of things. But equally, you can share these slides with your students if it's appropriate. This comes from our friends that we work with a lot on circular economy projects over at Farm Urban. Why does this all matter? If there's food and biodegradable waste in our landfill, actually food waste plus a lack of oxygen, creation of bacteria, and then methane. So actually people talk about cows. Cows are the kind of the be all and end all in terms of methane. And countries who are high beef producing are contributing enormously. But actually landfill contributes enormously to methane, and methane, although we don't talk about it so much in terms of climate, is actually 28 times more potent than CO2. There's a lot of science behind that, which I decided not to put in here, but it's easily kind of searchable. Equally, if we've got plastic waste in landfill, and this is something that you do all probably know, these plastics can take up to 500 years to decompose. And those microplastics that they do finally break down into, and chemicals, are seeping slowly into our waterways and food supply. This idea of circular economy is much more than avoiding landfill, but actually we need to understand why we're doing it quickly, and avoiding landfill for these reasons. So again, quick recap. Linear economy is how things have most traditionally been done. We take it, we make it, we use it. The circular economy builds on that, and actually does as much as possible to stop anything getting into the bin at the end of the day. And what you can see actually on this circular one is starting to go into more detail. We're not just talking about things not going to landfill. We are talking about rethinking production, rethinking how we design things, the materials that we use. So it goes right from design and manufacture through to retailers, through consumers and householders. Then we get to the R's that we talked about last week, those 9 R's: reuse, repair, recycle. And then obviously the recycling sector have a big role to play in hopefully breaking down some of those products. But if we thought about them cleverly in the design process, then those products can then be reused. So when we're talking about the circular economy, we are not simply talking about reducing waste. We're talking about how do we do that? And actually, it's the really clever thinking that goes into doing things differently right from the conception of any kind of given product. So this is an activity. Neil does this in schools sometimes, particularly when he's in primary schools. He'll give the kids some ideas of different types of products and just ask them to think how they might reuse them. I'm going to ask you all to go a little step further than that today and actually think about how might any of these be reused, okay? But actually, is there a better solution than just reuse? So we're really moving beyond recycling. And if you think back to those 9 R's, we had rethink, recharge, repair. So I am going to pop you once again into breakout rooms. I'm just counting, and I'm going to put you actually into rooms of 3 this time. And your breakout room will have a name of 2 products. So I just want you in your groups of 3 to think about, okay, is there something that this product can be reused for? Great. Is there something better than recycling that we can do with it? But actually, is there a better way? Is there a different way of approaching the need for this product entirely? And I'm really curious to see what you come up with. Your room name has 2 of those items. I want you to think about how we could use them differently, but actually, more importantly, is there a completely different way? If we're being really imaginative, what might your kids come up with? But they're completely different ways of approaching the need even for these products. And I'm going to open the rooms now. You're going to have Great, we're back in the room. I'm curious, just to get a little bit of feedback from each of those.
Yeah, I mean, greeting cards are sort of two-pronged really, because you can reuse greeting cards. They can be reused to create further greeting cards, but we were saying it needs to be on a bigger picture. So maybe instead of sending greeting cards out, maybe meeting up and seeing people face to face, or sending out sort of emails instead, that sort of way. But that also has a carbon footprint, doesn't it? So I was just saying, I know a lot of my neighbours actually, instead of having greeting cards, they put money into charity, and that we're all put into a certain charity instead.
Okay, so kind of rethinking the way, do we need greetings cards?
Cards, yeah.
Great.
And then
part of that rethinking, Karen, was thinking about how it's really important to enable students and schools to move away from oversimplistic messages about individual actions having an impact. They can give a sense of agency, however, they can end up as some sort of well-meaning intentionality that means that actually that's what the current fossil fuel world wants things to sort of continue, with people feeling a little bit guilty and trying to do their bit, whereas actually fundamentally it needs a sort of complete rethink. And I think it's really important that we as schools find ways of modeling that, because we are anchor institutions with large numbers of people involved. We need to convey messages that go beyond simply do your bit. I feel really passionately about that as a climate educator.
Yeah. And certainly it's something that we've grappled with. But Anna, just popping back in. Yeah, that sense of young people really feeling the pressure to be taking action at a level that really isn't going to have an enormous impact. Although that sense of agency from taking action and taking action in a community and working together can be enormously important in terms of a sense of belonging. But actually zooming out within schools and doing some of that thinking about, okay, how do we really look at this again in a completely different way? And I like that thinking, Ruth, about we can get rid of some of the consumption. We don't need the greetings cards. We can do something different. So, and back into just thinking about waste, because all of this actually, one of the things, and this kind of speaks to what Mark was saying, actually, young people have to have a sense of the zoomed out issues. But also, there's a quote that I love. It's not entirely appropriate for today, but from Hannah Arendt, who's an educational philosopher. And she always says that education is the point at which we decide whether we care enough about the world to take responsibility for it. And I think that as educators, a significant part of our role is about inspiring a sense of wonder and awe, but perhaps also guardianship for the world, and giving young people reasons to care for things, or care about things. So some more quick facts and figures. I'm going to whiz through these, and some of these you might know already. There are enough clothes on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations. Absolutely bonkers when you think about it. We've got a population here in the city region of 1.5 million. That equates to about 660,000 households. And actually in 21-22, this is the most recent data we could get hold of, 36.6% of that was recycled. Now, clearly, I already mentioned that Liverpool's rates are really quite low. So clearly some of the other boroughs are doing things slightly better somehow. And perhaps some of that is about public education campaigns. This last bullet point on here. So actually, I alluded to landfill earlier, thinking about what's the end difficulty that we're kind of moving backwards from, what are we trying to prevent? And actually, across Liverpool City Region, 7 landfill sites have been closed. We no longer use any landfill sites in the Liverpool City Region. And I'm curious, does anyone know why or what happens now? No, I see some Carl's looking confused, but maybe that's just your resting face. Sorry, Carl. I'm sometimes
No,
too
I am genuinely
frivolous.
confused.
Anyone? Any ideas what happens to our waste now?
I would imagine it's probably some dark and mysterious contract with the multinational firms that are dealing with waste, who are looking to outsource it to the cheapest possible context. So it's part of a sort of business model.
That would be one possible answer. And certainly much of our waste is sent abroad. But actually, in the case of us, and I believe quite a few other places now, actually what happens is the Merseyside Waste and Recycling Authority are actually responsible for doing this. So all the waste goes off, and the non-recyclable rubbish arrives at the rail transfer loading station, and they load it onto a special train, and that waste goes on a journey, gets tipped into 2 big bunkers actually in Wiltshire, and they kind of mix it all up, so it ensures an even burn. And as they then burn this waste, there's heat generated, there's energy generated. Obviously, there's lots of science behind this that I do not understand. There are some gases given off, which actually you can sort of follow the gases through their little journey. They do get passed through filters. The extent to which that actually cleans those gases, I'm not sure. But steam is generated, and that steam is pushed through a turbine, which generates electricity for about 60,000 households near that incineration site, I believe. Most of what comes out after that gas is cleaned is steam. And then there is actually some heat, some residual heat left over that's used to heat buildings nearby. I'm not going to comment on this really, because I have to be honest, I don't understand enough about all of the science involved in this process to really make judgment on it. But if we're thinking about innovative, imaginative ways of making how the current system exists, of course, Mark, we'd all love to rethink and start from scratch. But actually, this seems like a pretty good, certainly a good alternative to landfill. I am though curious, and maybe this is, Mark, where the shipping off to other countries and kind of stuff with corporations happens. If you look at the right sort of bottom right hand side, there's this little truck which is carrying off a small amount of residue, and that's being sent off, treated further, and disposed of. I noted quite strongly that this is from the Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority. It doesn't say where or how that little bit of residual waste is being disposed of, but certainly on the face of it, this is quite a sort of progressive approach to taking us away from landfill. And certainly really interesting to know about and to be able to kind of share this journey with our students. There's so much richness here in terms of things we can explore in science, things we can explore in kind of geography, and joining the dots between some of those different subject areas. So I'm going to whiz us through a little bit of, we're running out of time. Okay. And you may well know this, but also perhaps you don't. The GFE has a sustainability and climate strategy. This link, I'll show you the website afterwards, I've got it open, but they identify 5 main action areas: climate ed, green skills and careers, the education on estate and kind of buildings management and digital infrastructure, operations and supply chains, and somebody alluded to that earlier, we needed to talk to our suppliers as well, and an international element. So this is as it is within sustainability and climate strategy. But as is often the case with the DFE, it's not quite that straightforward, because they've then gone and requested, let me see. I'm going to pose this question, but I'm not actually I don't think we've got time to really dwell on it. But the question, I was curious, and actually maybe you could just raise a hand if you've already seen or had to read any of this strategy. Just give me a little indication with a reaction, a raised hand, a smiley face or something, if you're aware of this and have seen it before. So Mark's saying yes. Trixie, yes. Anyone else? Okay, so this is what's kind of guiding the current move within the education system more generally. And actually within this, and I was just in the process of saying, the DFE never make things as straightforward as we all might like them to. But they have said that by 2025, all education settings will have a nominated sustainability lead and put in place a climate action plan. Now, we would argue that you really need to have some understanding of things like circular economies and what are the kind of the best progressive and imaginative and innovative choices to make when you're putting together a climate action plan, which is why I'm linking this to this circular economy session. And actually, is this the case for your setting? Great, I'm getting mostly yeses. Excellent. Yes, but not widely known, says Trixie. Thank you. And are you aware of what support is available around these? So I'm just going to move us through into some of that support that is available. There are 3 really great organisations that the government references. Sustainability support for education, actually the government themselves put in place, and they've put together what we're going to move on to, actually what are the 4 pillars of climate action. So although the strategy has 5 focus areas, actually they then say that you need to look at 4 things within your climate action planning. And that those 4 pillars were created by Sustainability Support for Education, who were kind of contracted by the DFE to put some support together for schools. The Climate Ambassador Programme, Let's Go Zero, and the National Education Nature Park are all organisations who will give you free support actually putting together a climate action plan. So that's just for information there. Okay. So, like I say, the DFE, 5 things within the strategy, but actually 4 pillars when it comes to your climate action planning. And I think these are pretty self-explanatory, but what I'm going to do is just do a quick quiz by way of keeping things interactive. Oh, hopefully. Oh. There we go. So I'm just launching a quick matching activity. Hopefully you can see that decarbonisation is all about net zero, reducing emissions within the school estate. Maybe not such immediately obvious links to circular economy, but certainly they're there. Adaptation and resilience. How do we make our schools more resilient to future changes in climate? And that really can actually be somewhere where innovative design thinking can come into play in terms of the school's estate. Improving environment and biodiversity. And actually those of you who are doing things like composting food, are both contributing to environment and biodiversity, but you're doing it in a kind of circular economy fashion. And then climate ed is really broad, actually. Their definition of climate education includes excellence in education in skills, green careers, a kind of whole swathe of things fall under that final one. And that is something that we'll explore a little bit further in our next session. So your climate action plans. Every school's climate action plan should include goals, who's responsible, timelines, and measurements. And we're going to, in the next session, really think about how we could embed circular economy principles and thinking within these kinds of plans. I was going to do an activity, but we are actually out of time, and I'm really conscious of not keeping you all for too long after a long day in school. So we will revisit in the next session the 9 R's, but also think about them in terms of those 4 climate action pillars and really do some collaborative planning together. So I'm going to kind of revise what I was going to ask you to do in the in-between time. I'll rethink that because I've run out of time today. Just a quick quote from the Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority. The circular economy looks to eliminate unnecessary waste. We know this. They say by considering what we buy, what things are made of, how they're designed, and if they can have a further use when we're ready to dispose of them, can massively reduce our environmental impact, which is kind of the whole thing about circular economy. I'm just going to share my final slide, which is just, so we will send some kind of more homework for you to hopefully have a little go at school. And we will also share the 9 R's activity with much more additional kind of resource around it, the definitions of the R's and some preparation and pre-activity to do with your students if you have time. And also we are going to ask you to maybe, if you're able, to bring a copy of your school's climate action plan along to the next session. The next session is Wednesday, the 28th of January. We're doing a half day. We'll have lunch at the end of the session, so lunch at 12 noon, hopefully giving you time to get back to school for the afternoon. We'll be in the central library, and obviously we will be sending out more information about that beforehand. On the day, we'll be looking really in some more detail at developing some solutions, exploring some challenges, and prioritizing some of the ideas, and thinking really about how does this apply to your school setting? How is it applicable? How is it relevant? And also some more ideas about how you might go on and teach circular economy principles within a variety of kind of subject areas and age groups, key stages.